My name is Nomi Calderon, and I learned the hard way that silence doesn't earn you love. It just teaches people how to forget you. For years, I kept swallowing my words every time my father looked at me with that quiet disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than anger. I told myself it was respect. I told myself he'd see me, someday, for who I really was. But the day he turned away and said I'd never be part of his family again, something inside me stopped waiting. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just stood there and realized the truth he never would. Some doors don't close. They're slammed shut to see if you'll find another way out. And I did. He still doesn't know what that silence cost him, but he's about to. I still remember the sting of jet fuel that morning, sharp, metallic, and permanent, like it had seeped into my skin. My father stood on the porch in his faded flight jacket, the one that still carried the faint smell of engine oil and command. The silver sergeant wings over his chest caught the sun, but his eyes stayed flat and cold. He didn't shout. He never needed to. His words came steady, clipped, each one hitting like a trigger pull. He told me that if I chose a life outside the flag, I no longer carried his name. I stood there with the acceptance letter folded tight in my hands, the one I'd been proud to show him, proof that I'd earned my own way. He didn't even glance at it. His hand rose, not in anger, but dismissal. The kind of gesture that ends a conversation, a relationship, a childhood. The door slammed, and the walls trembled like an aircraft breaking sound. My mother cried, clutching his arm. He pulled free without looking at her. My brother Marco hovered on the stairs, 16 and pale, frozen between us. I left in the Texas heat with 3 things. The burned edge of a wing design I'd been sketching for weeks, the flight badge he'd given me when I was 10, and a hollow ache that pressed hard against my ribs. 18 years later, Denver's dry wind carried the same scent of metal. My life had become clean lines, order, silence, the only way to make sense of wreckage. That morning, I opened my mailbox to a wedding invitation. Marco Calderon and Lydia Marshall, Randolph Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas. My mother's handwriting looped at the bottom. It would mean the world to have you home. For a moment, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I thought I'd built a life immune to that word, family. But then my phone buzzed, and a message lit up the screen. Don't come. Don't embarrass him. 4 words, no name, just a blade I'd felt before. I deleted it. The reflection in the window showed a woman older, steadier, but her eyes still carried the same fire that once met his. I whispered to the empty room. Steady and sure. I would go. Not for him. For Marco. And for what my father buried long ago. That's where it all began. An invitation, a warning, and the quiet promise that nothing buried stays that way forever. I can still hear the sound, the sharp crack that split the air before the fire swallowed everything. It was 2008, and I was still wearing the flight cadet uniform that used to make me feel untouchable. Back then, I believed loyalty meant obedience, and that courage was measured by how quietly you followed orders. Eva Gonzalez died on a clear morning, the kind where the sun burns too bright to make sense of tragedy. The report said pilot error, a clean conclusion stamped and filed away before the wreckage cooled. But Eva never made mistakes. She was steady, methodical. Her hands didn't shake even in turbulence. I knew something didn't fit. I stayed after hours in the hangar, logged into the training system under an instructor's ID I'd memorized by watching too closely, buried under layers of encrypted reports. I found it. A modification log for the T-38's stabilizer control. Its parameters changed 2 weeks before the crash. Someone had altered the safety range, shaving seconds off reaction time. I brought it to my commanding officer the next day. He read the report without meeting my eyes, then told me to hand over my badge. A week later, I was suspended and barred from the network. By then, the official narrative was sealed. When the final accident report was released, one signature sat at the bottom in neat blue ink. H. Calderon. My father's. That was the moment I stopped wondering why he could never look at me without that shadow of contempt. It wasn't disappointment. It was fear. He hadn't protected honor or country. He'd protected a lie that cost a girl her life. I walked away from the academy soon after, trading the uniform for civilian clothes and a colder kind of work, finding truth among twisted metal and fire. And every time I stood at another crash site, notebook in hand, I couldn't help asking the same question. How many of these were accidents? And how many were cover-ups with signatures like his at the bottom? 18 years later, the snow outside my Denver office fell like ash. I was deep into a routine case, a private jet down in Wyoming. When I traced the serial number of the engine back through maintenance logs, the model code stopped me cold. It was the same series used in the 2008 training jets. Scrolling through the archive, an old digital folder surfaced, dated and forgotten. The title line read, H. Calderon, Training Modification 2008. I opened it, pulse steady, breath not. There it was, the schematic of the stabilizer adjustment, and at the bottom, a note in bold font. Revised under direct order of Cole Marshall, Colonel Marshall, the same man whose daughter, Lydia, was about to marry my brother. For a long moment, I just sat there, the hum of the computer blending with the wind scraping the window panes. The pieces fell together with the precision of a rivet gun. My father had been ordered to falsify the report. Marshall had issued the command, and Eva had died, paying for both of them. The blue light of the monitor washed over my hands. I closed the file, shut down the system, and reached into my coat pocket. The wedding invitation was still there, its gold letters glinting faintly in the glow. Randolph Air Force Base, San Antonio. I let out a dry laugh that didn't sound like me. The past had a cruel sense of direction. It always found its way home. The sky wasn't done with us yet. The Texas heat hit like a hammer when I stepped off the plane. Dry and relentless. Randolph Air Force Base shimmered in the distance. The same neat rows of pines, and the black iron gate I'd seen a lifetime ago. Driving past our old house, I slowed just long enough to notice the dent still marking the front door. A new flag waved from the porch, crisp and bright. Everything my father wanted to preserve was still there. Except me. The rehearsal dinner felt like walking into a cockpit mid-dive. Conversation stopped as soon as I entered. My dress was plain, and his stare made me feel like a stain on his uniform. He stood tall in full regalia, medals flashing beneath the chandeliers. His voice carried easily over the clinking of glasses, announcing that his daughter now spent her days picking through airplane wrecks. The laughter that followed was thin and uneasy. I lifted my glass and told him I just wanted to make sure no one else had to die for someone's mistake. The silence that followed could have grounded a jet. When the crowd thinned, Lydia found me near the back doors. She whispered that she knew about the crash in 2008. A letter, her father's, confessed that mine had tried to report the defect, but was forced to sign a falsified report. I asked if she still had it. She nodded. She wanted Marco to know. I told her not yet. If the truth came out now, it would break my father. I'd take that burden myself. He came to my hotel the next morning, set a cup of coffee down without a word. He accused me of digging up the past to shame him. I said I was doing my job. He said truth destroys families. I said it only refuses to stay buried. He walked out, door slamming like a gunshot. That night at the pre-wedding party, he bragged about honor and family, then threw a glance sharp as shrapnel. Some people forget what blood runs in their veins. I raised my glass. Everyone has blood, I said, but honor has to survive fire. The room went dead quiet. My mother fled. Marco tried to calm him, and my father shouted that I had disgraced us. I told him it was his silence that did. Later, rain hammered the windshield as Lydia appeared, soaked and shaking, the letter clutched in her hand. She said she'd speak tomorrow. I told her then I'd stand beside her when she did, the day before the wedding. Texas turned. Heavy clouds gathered like bruises across the horizon, swallowing the sun. I walked toward the old hangar on the edge of Randolph Base, the one that still carried my father's name in faint paint. The smell of jet fuel clung to the damp air, mixed with rust and dust, the scent of time refusing to move on. Inside, the metal echoed under my steps. I ran my fingers along a corroded frame and found the letters scratched into the surface. HC 2008. My father's mark. Proof that once, he'd been proud to leave his name on steel. The sound of boots broke the quiet behind me. He was there, hands in pockets, posture still squared like a soldier at inspection. His eyes stayed sharp. He asked if I was digging up old ghosts again. I told him I was only looking at what he'd tried to bury. He said some things had to stay buried to survive. I told him burying the truth was its own slow death. His jaw tightened. He called me reckless, said I was ruining everything Marco had worked for, that he deserved peace, not shame. I said peace built on lies never lasts. A gust of wind slammed the sheet metal wall, the sound shrieking like a warning siren. I turned toward the storage cabinet along the wall and pulled open a drawer. 2 folders sat there, one stamped Final Report 2008, another unsigned. I read the note on the second. Technical deviation poses fatal risk. Immediate suspension recommended. Draft. H. Calderon. The ink had bled, but the message was clear. He had tried to tell the truth once. Someone had taken that chance from him. When I looked up, he was already walking away, his shadow stretching long and uneven across the floor, still large, but hollowed out. That night, thunder rolled like distant artillery. Lydia called. Her voice trembled but didn't break. She said she couldn't carry the lie any longer, that she would tell everyone tomorrow. I told her I'd stand beside her. Outside, lightning split the sky. The storm was coming, and this time, none of us would outrun it. By morning, the airbase gleamed under a pale, nervous light. Rows of flags lined the open field where the ceremony was set. The sky hung low, heavy with the smell of rain. Guests filled the white chairs, uniforms pressed and spotless. My father took the stage first, his voice cutting clean through the wind, strong, commanding, every word like a drill order. He spoke of legacy, duty, the honor of the Calderon name. Then he paused, his gaze sliding toward me. He said some people didn't understand honor, especially those who had walked away from it. Each word sliced deeper than the next. Marco's eyes darted between us, panic written across his face. I smiled faintly at him. Storm's coming, little brother. Then Lydia stepped forward. Her dress whipped in the wind, her bouquet forgotten. She gripped the microphone with both hands, voice shaking but clear. If honor means silence in the face of wrongdoing, she said, then it isn't honor at all. 18 years ago, Colonel Marshall, her father, had ordered a false report, forcing Hector Calderon to sign. Hector hadn't betrayed honor. He'd been forced into silence. Gasps tore through the crowd. My father froze, color draining from his face. Lydia raised the letter high, the military seal still intact. Marco reached for my hand. He whispered that he'd known something was wrong, but had waited for me to speak. My mother sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. An older officer stood, his voice steady but low. He said he remembered the crash, how Hector had argued against the cover-up, how none of them had the courage to back him. He looked at my father, then at me. What your daughter did today, he said, is what we should have done years ago. No applause followed, only thunder splitting open the sky. The first drops fell. Then came the alarm, sharp, urgent, metallic. A drone from the demonstration field had gone down in the storm. The power flickered, then died. Smoke rose beyond the tents, and the crowd broke into chaos. I ran toward the noise. Electricity snapped through puddles near the wreck. I yelled for people to move, to keep clear of the high-voltage lines. My father was already there, bleeding from a cut above his eye, helping a child trapped under a section of fencing. I shouted for him to step back. He hesitated, then obeyed. Together, we pulled the boy free just as a flare of light burst behind us, the heat brushing our backs. When it was over, I collapsed to my knees, lungs burning, arms shaking. He sat beside me, soaked, staring at me with something that looked like understanding, or maybe regret. For once, he had nothing to say. The storm kept howling, lights flashing across the soaked tarmac. He stood there in the rain, uniform dark with water, metals dull beneath the lightning. His voice came out low, barely audible over the wind. Maybe I was wrong. Know me. I didn't answer. The rain washed the grime from his insignia, leaving it shining again. Only this time, the light came from the sky, not from him. When the storm finally passed, the base looked like a battlefield. Mud mixed with gasoline. Smoke clung to every surface, and the air smelled of metal and rain. Ambulance lights flashed red and blue against the hangar walls, painting broken silhouettes that moved without sound. I sat against the cold metal, my hands still trembling, clothes soaked and streaked with oil and blood. Somewhere nearby, a medic called out names, his voice muffled by the ringing in my ears. Then I heard it, my father's name. He was alive. They said, minor injuries. The hallway to the infirmary was lined with muddy footprints. When I pushed the door open, a low amber light fell across him, his sleeve torn, a bandage around his hand, shoulders slumped. The man who once filled every room felt smaller now, as if the storm had taken part of him with it. He rasped that I'd saved a life. I told him I only did what he'd taught me, to never turn away when someone needed help. He gave a broken laugh, said he wasn't fit to teach anyone anymore. On the table beside him lay his pilot insignia, dented and dull. I wiped it clean and set it in front of him. It still shines, I said. You can bury the truth, but it never disappears. He looked at me for a long time, eyes washed gray, voice low. He said he hadn't cast me out from hate, but from fear. Fear that I'd see the coward he'd become. I told him I never needed him flawless, only honest. We sat in silence, listening to the hum of a generator starting somewhere outside, its rhythm steady like rotor blades finding life again. I took his hand, not in forgiveness, but in acknowledgement. We'd both spent years trapped in quiet. Now, it was time to let the wind speak for us. A week later, the headlines rolled through every military newswire. NTSB reopens 2008 training explosion case. Original findings falsified. Mechanical flaw confirmed. The old and new reports were displayed side by side for the press. The contrast almost cruel in its simplicity. Beneath my father's signature, the addendum read, signed under superior order. He didn't attend the briefing. It was Marco, Lydia, and I who stood before the Defense Department board, our statements neat and measured under the fluorescent lights. Lydia spoke first. Her voice carried through the sterile room with quiet conviction, saying that no one should ever have to stay silent to protect a lie, especially when the truth could save lives. The applause that followed was brief but real. Cameras flashed, white bursts reflecting off the glass panels. For a split second, in the reflection of that glass, I saw him, my father, standing outside, no medals, no uniform, just the unburdened face of a man finally breathing freely. That night, I found him at the Veterans Hospital. The ward smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. On the table sat a yellowed envelope with my mother's handwriting. He slid it toward me, said he'd never had the courage to open it. My hand shook as I did. Her words were soft and steady, like she was still there. If you and your father ever meet again, don't search for apology. Look for understanding. Forgiveness doesn't make you weak. Know me? It makes you free. The tears came hot and sudden. I asked him if he'd ever told her he was sorry. He said every day. I nodded. That's enough, I said. The truth was out. The storm had passed. There were no heroes left, only two people finally done running. A month later, I was back in the air, heading north with the NTSB crew. Alaska stretched beneath us like a sheet of frozen glass, sunlight bouncing off endless fields of white. The sky felt wider there, quieter, like it had room for forgiveness. The radar pulsed its steady green rhythm on the panel. I reached into my jacket pocket, and placed my father's old pilot insignia beside the altimeter. Not as a tribute, just a reminder that real honor often begins with the courage to admit you were wrong. My phone buzzed once. A message from his number. If you ever fly over Texas, stop by the old hangar. No past, just two people learning to stand side by side. I read it, then turned the screen face down, not out of anger, but peace. Some doors don't need closing or opening, they just need to exist. I eased the collective, the helicopter lifting higher. The rotor's hum folded into the wind. Sunlight spilled through the glass, catching my reflection. Someone once cast out, now steering her own sky. Hold the altitude, I whispered, and never land for the wrong reasons again. The aircraft cut through silver clouds, leaving a thin white trail behind, stitching the sky where the past had finally healed.